Good morning and welcome to this Horizon Implementation Day on Grant Management. My name is Manuel ROMARIS. I'm training coordinator for Horizon Europe, and today I will replace Peter Hardwich in this introduction and guiding you through the rest of the morning. So we have divided the morning in two big blocks, one on amendments, the other one on reporting and payments, and each of them has a legal part and a business process part. And we will take, after each of these big blocks, we will take questions all together, both for the legal part and for the business process part. And at the very end, we have a small presentation about 15 minutes on fraud prevention, detection, and correction. So, without any other saying, just tell you that we have Slido questions, so you know how that works, slido.com. The code in Slido is Horizon 3, that means the number 3, Horizon no space 3, and here you can put questions. Please have a look at the previous questions, whether somebody has asked a similar question, so if this question is similar to yours, please upvote it, and we will answer the questions following the number of likes they have received. We have the first presentation is amendments, the legal basis, and we have, not here in the studio we have now the second presentation, which is business process, is Agnese BOSCAROL, who will introduce actually the business process after the legal part. The legal part will be done remotely by Angélique. Angélique is a legal officer, he's a lawyer in the Common Implementation Center, and she's connected now, I hope, through Teams. Angélique? Hello, good morning. We cannot hear you so far. You are muted.
I am not muted in theory. Can you hear me? Good morning.
We can hear you.
Good morning to all of you.
If you can show your presentation, please. And you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Manuel. Normally my presentation is already on screen, so I will start right now. So as you said, I am a legal officer in the Common Legal Support Service, which is the legal unit of the DG RTD. And this morning, together with my colleague Agnese, we are going to present you the main elements regarding amendment procedure. And for my part, I will focus on the legal aspects of amendment, and Agnese will then continue presenting you the process and the technical aspects on that. Before entering into the technicalities of the amendment procedure, allow me to give you a bit of context. So, from a legal point of view, what is an amendment? It is very simple. I would say an amendment is a change to the grant agreement. The grant agreement is the contractual document that the beneficiaries of a grant will sign with the granting authority. And the granting authority may be, for instance, the European Commission, one of the executive agencies, or maybe a joint undertaking. And as you are certainly well aware, the grant agreement lays down the rights, but also the obligation, of course, of the beneficiaries in respect of the grant, and also other aspects such as the duration of the grant, the action, the subject of the action. It can also precise the funding that the granting authorities has available to fund your grant, and here the legal term is the maximum grant amount to which the beneficiary will be entitled for the implementation of this action. So you will see that if it is possible to amend a grant agreement, we are going to see that the procedure is limited to some aspects and that the amendment procedure is not open to the entire provisions of the grant. So in a first time, I will present you the conditions and the procedure to amend a grant agreement. And in a second time, we will see when an amendment to the grant agreement is required. So if you look to a model grant agreement, for instance, a Europe model grant agreement, or to your own model grant agreement, you will find that the conditions in which an amendment can be requested, as well as the procedure to be followed, are defined in Article 39. And the first question that you may have is, what can you change in your grant agreement? So, as I briefly said in the introduction, it is not possible to change everything, to change every provision in the grant agreement. And I will now explain you the reason why. Horizon Europe Model Grant Agreement is now based on a template which is common to all funding program of the EU, meaning it is not only for Horizon Europe, but for all other programs. And this template, which is now known as the corporate template, has been adopted by a Commission decision. And this template defines general terms and conditions which cannot be modified because they apply across the board, meaning to all other grants, not only to Horizon. However, as you know, each program, for instance, Horizon Europe, has its own specificities, and the corporate template preserves and addresses also these specificities. So now the question you may have certainly is, but what can I change in my grant agreement? What is changeable in a grant agreement? So in the end, as I said, it is not possible to change the general terms and conditions. However, you can change and amend what is specific to your project. And what is specific to your project is, for instance, the duration of the action, a change related to a beneficiary. And in fact, you can find this specific data in a new document, in a new part of the grant agreement. This is a novelty compared to what we had under Horizon 2020. You can find this specific data in the data sheet, which is at the very beginning of your contract, around page 10. This is the very first part that you will encounter if you go to consult your grant agreement. However, this does not mean that you can change everything in your data sheet, because, for instance, it is not possible to amend the maximum grant amount. It is not possible to increase that. The maximum grant amount, meaning that the budget that the granting authority has available for your grant, is set once and for all, except very rare exceptions. So, in addition of the data which are set in your datasheet, there are other aspects that can be changed. It is, for instance, the data which are in the Annexes 1, which correspond to the description of your action, and Annex 2, which correspond to the estimated budget of the action. However, there are some limitations to the amendment that you can bring to the specific data of your action. Notably, it is not possible to make changes which would call into question the decision to award your grant. This means that if, for instance, you request an amendment to introduce a feature in your grant, and if this feature would have been known at the time of the evaluation and would have made your proposal not selected, then you cannot, during the course of your action, you cannot introduce this feature as an amendment. But let's be very concrete, let's be very clear on that. For instance, if you introduce a request to change the description of your action and that the tasks are changed in a way that you would make your project fall out the scope of the call or the topic, the granting authority cannot accept this change. Let's take another example, which can also be clearer for you. You know that there are minimum conditions to participate in Horizon Europe action, and it is notably the minimum conditions for multi-beneficiaries action. And usually, the minimum conditions are to have one entity established in a member state and two other entities established in other member states or associated countries. If your consortium, let's take this assumption that your consortium involves only 3 legal entities, you are fulfilling the minimum condition. However, if at some point of the action you would like to introduce an amendment which would consist of a removal of one of these 3 beneficiaries, this would not be accepted because the fact is that your consortium would fall below the minimum requirement, which is 3 entities must participate in multi-beneficiary actions. So the second limitation to the amendment which can be introduced in a grant agreement is that no change can be introduced in breach of the principle of equal treatment. And this is also the reason why we cannot make changes to the general terms and conditions in the agreement. Otherwise, the beneficiary would have different general terms and conditions and therefore would not be treated equally. And the last limitation, which is also important, is that the change must comply with the legal framework of Horizon Europe. And by legal framework here, I mean the rules for participation of Horizon Europe, which are defined in Horizon Europe regulation, the financial regulation, which is the regulation laying down the rules which apply to the Union budget, and also the rest of your grant agreement, and notably the general terms and conditions. And for this last point, let me take a concrete example. In Article 7, for instance, related to the role of the coordinator, you will see that there is a list of tasks that the coordinator cannot delegate or subcontract, even to another beneficiary of the action or a third party. And this concerns the tasks which are very specific to the coordinator, because you know that the coordinator is the main interlocutor of the granting authority. And for example, it is not possible to delegate or subcontract the fact that the coordinator must submit the reports or distribute the payments. This task cannot be delegated, therefore you cannot make an amendment, for instance, to delegate them. This would not be accepted by the granting authority. So the second question now you may have in relation to Article 39 of the Horizon Europe Model Grant Agreement dealing with amendment is who can request an amendment. In the grant agreement, you have 2 parties. On one side, the beneficiaries, and on the other side, the granting authority. An amendment can be requested by any of the 2 parties. This is very clear, but in practice, it will be most of the time a request coming from the consortium. It is possible, of course, that the granting authority introduce a request and start an amendment procedure. However, you will see that it is relatively rare. So when an amendment is requested by the consortium, in practice, it will be signed and submitted by the coordinator. The coordinator has this capacity, and notably because the other beneficiaries, when acceded to the grant, have accepted that the coordinator can sign and submit an amendment on their behalf. You will see that it is part of the accession form. So the general rule is that the coordinator launch, sign, and submit an amendment. However, there is one exception to this rule. This exception is when the coordinator is replaced without the agreement of this coordinator. Of course, this is not a nice situation to encounter, and we wish that it will not happen in the case of your Horizon Europe action. However, but if ever it happens, what is foreseen is that another beneficiary will then be appointed on behalf of the other beneficiary of the consortium and will submit this very particular type of amendment. Now, last question is how to make an amendment, how to introduce an amendment. So for the how, I will be very brief because my colleagues will make a full presentation just after this one about how, but I would like to make one or two legal comments about that. First of all, is that the amendment is fully electronic. You will see that they are managed in the portal. And the particularity is that the amendments are done in writing, and there is nothing done in oral for an amendment. The second element is that there is one party requesting the amendment, and as I already explained, most of the time it is the consortium, and there is a party receiving the amendment, which is usually the granting authority. So the receiving party, meaning most of the time the granting authority, has 45 days to assess the amendment request and then to accept or to reject the amendment. And it is very important that you are aware that the amendment is either explicitly accepted or rejected, but there is no tacit approval at all. As you have understood, an amendment is a legal change. Therefore, it must be substantiated. From a legal perspective, but also to allow the receiving party to assess the amendment, the amendment request must provide for the reason, it must justify the amendment, and it must also contain all the documents supporting this amendment. Let's take an example. The amendment consists in adding an affiliated entity. And you may know that an affiliated entity is a third party to the grant agreement, which has a legal link with a beneficiary. So what we will request here as a supporting document is a proof of this legal link between the affiliated entity and the beneficiary. Concerning also the supporting document, I would like to spot here also the specific case and coming back again to the change of the coordinator without its agreement. If this situation unfortunately occurs in the course of your action, the change of the coordinator without the agreement will have to be, so the amendment will have to be submitted by another beneficiary, which is very exceptional, not by the coordinator. And the request will have to include three types of documents. The first document that it is expected from the consortium is that there is a decision of the consortium to replace the defaultee coordinator. The second element is that the beneficiary who will submit the amendment request on behalf of the consortium must be appointed by the consortium. And the last one, and I really insist on that, is that the request must contain a document indicating in writing that the opinion of the change coordinator has been requested. We request either the opinion or at least a proof that the opinion has been requested. And all these documents are requested, otherwise the amendment would be considered improper. In terms of timelines, let's have a look on an amendment which is triggered by the consortium. So here again, I will limit my presentation to the legal aspects because further detail will be presented by my colleague Agnese in a moment. So usually amendments are done before the end of the action. However, you can see that there are some situations where an amendment can be done after the end of the action. For instance, for your action, or the action is finished, but it appears that the coordinator has gone bankrupt. And in here, the granting authority having to do the final payment to the coordinator will have to do the payment to an entity that is not bankrupt. This means that the coordinator, so the consortium, will have to change and will have to ask an amendment to replace the coordinator after the end of the action. So what we would recommend as a best practice when an amendment is prepared is, or when an amendment is considered, is if you have any doubts about whether it is an amendment or not, we recommend that you discuss your project with the project officer in charge with your grant. He or she will probably be in a situation to support you in this process. So the first step is that the amendment is prepared and submitted by the coordinator. But even if it's a task that it is a coordinator task, according to the Article 7 of the grant agreement, the coordinator cannot do it on its own and do what it wants, meaning that the coordinator must act also in agreement with the consortium or in accordance with the consortium agreement, which may define, for instance, a decision-making process. And just here to refresh our minds, the consortium agreements most of the time defines the internal arrangements of the consortium. And as a practice, we really invite you to conclude a consortium agreement in order to ensure that your action is implemented as smoothly as possible. And as part of it, we strongly recommend that it contains the process to take decision and in particular to make an amendment. So to get back to the amendment procedure, once the amendment preparation is over and that the amendment from the consortium point of view is ready, it will be submitted to the granting authority for an informal assessment. C'est-à-dire the granting authority will consider whether the request is correct and then provide the feedback to the coordinator. And after that, when the amendment is considered correct, the coordinator can sign and submit it formally. So once the amendment request is formally submitted by the coordinator, the granting authority will make a formal assessment within 45 days, as I already explained you in the previous slide. And very exceptionally, this deadline can be extended. For instance, if the amendment is complex, it may require an extension of the deadline. Or maybe the change consists in introducing a new task or make some change in the task, but the assessment can only be done based on a review of the project. Of course, for this kind of example, the deadline will probably be extended to allow a proper assessment of your request. When the request has been assessed, then the granting authority will either explicitly accept or reject it. As I said, there is no tacit approval. Imagine that during this process and before the granting authority countersign the agreement, you decide to withdraw. It is possible to withdraw the amendment up until the signature by the granting authority. But we here, for the example, will stay with the example that you want, the amendment and the change to be introduced. So when the assessment is done and that the granting authority approved it, the amendment is finalized when the granting authority signs the amendment. So the signature of the grant agreement by both parties, because you remember that the consortium and the coordinator signs when it formally submits the amendment, and then the granting authority countersigns. So when the grant is signed, this means that it triggers the entry into force of the amendment. So normally the entry into force is on the day it is signed by the last of the two signatures. So as I already said, in most of the cases, the last signature is that of the granting authority. This means that the amendment will enter into force the day when the granting authority signs the amendment. The entry into force means also that it is not possible anymore to withdraw the amendment. And the other notion here to be taken into account is when the amendment takes effect, c'est-à-dire when the change to the grant agreement start to apply. Here, there are two possibilities. Either the amendment takes effect on the specific date, which is agreed by both parties and which will be specified in the amendment. And in here, this date could be very important and may have an effect, for instance, on the eligibility of the cost. Imagine that the amendment has for purpose to add a beneficiary. It can be agreed that the amendment will take effect at the date when the new beneficiary signs the accession form. But the other possibility is that the amendment takes effect on the date of the entry into force, and it's here the case is when there is no agreement and where there is no specific date which has been provided in the amendment request. So before moving to the second part of this presentation, it is maybe worth to recall that the changes requested and which are agreed with the granting authority and by both parties will be incorporated in the grant agreement. But all the other provisions which are in the grant agreement and which are not concerned will remain unchanged and will continue to produce their legal effects. On that, the amendment has no effect. So now that you are aware of the conditions and the procedure to introduce an amendment to an Horizon Europe grant agreement, I propose that we see now when an amendment is necessary or not. So in front of you, we have listed, I would say, the main situations, the main type of amendments. So an amendment is requested when there is, for instance, a change in the consortium composition. For instance, there is a change of beneficiary or affiliated entity. Let's start, for instance, with a removal of an entity. And by removal, in legal term, we speak about the termination of participation. So the termination of a beneficiary may be requested from the side of the consortium or from the side of the granting authority. And if it is requested by the consortium, it can be either at the request of this beneficiary or at the request of the rest of the consortium. But in any case, it will have to be submitted by the coordinator. And one element that you must keep in mind when considering to terminate a beneficiary is that the beneficiaries in a consortium are jointly responsible for the implementation of the action. This means that they are together responsible for the full implementation of the action for which the grant has been awarded. So here, if a beneficiary is removed, meaning terminated from a legal point of view, the rest of the consortium must find a solution to carry out the project and the task which were initially allocated to this beneficiary. So this means that, for instance, the task can be reallocated to the remaining partners of the consortium, or it is possible to add another entity to take over of the task of the defaulting beneficiary. And in practice, the termination of this beneficiary will also require a change to the Annex 1, which is the description of the action, and also probably of the Annex 2, which is the estimated budget. Now, concerning a situation of a partial takeover. A beneficiary, so a partial takeover is a beneficiary subject to a partial acquisitions, which means that the right and the obligation of the initial entity are taken over by a new entity, but the initial one continues to exist. So when an amendment is introduced to add this new entity, meaning that the entities that has taken over the initial one, he will take over the right and obligation under the grant agreement. However, it will have to be assessed whether the initial entity will have to be removed or not from the action. And the last type of amendment that can be brought regarding the composition of the consortium is the situation of an addition or a removal of third parties. And notably here by third parties, we refer to affiliated entities and associated partners, because you will see that they are named and they are listed in Article 8 or in Article 9 of the grant agreement. This means that if there is a change on the side of a third party or an associated partner, this needs to be reflected and the grant agreement has to be updated. As part of the common amendment, there are also the changes related to the coordinator. So I will not come back on the change of coordinator because I just explained them. But I will explain that if there is a change of the bank account of the coordinator, this will require an amendment for the reason that the bank account of the coordinator is provided in the datasheet. So this means that if there is a change to the bank account, so meaning a change to the number or the IBAN of the coordinator, the grant agreement will be updated to reflect this change, because the coordinator will receive from the grant authority the payments that is then to be distributed to the other members of the consortium. The third type of change which can be made to a grant agreement are the change in the description of the action or the change of the allocation of the task. And here, these changes are not covered by the budget flexibility rules. So it may happen that if you encounter a change of condition and that you have to carry out the project in a slightly different manner. So you need to bear in mind that the changes you may request to the description of your action will not be necessarily accepted by the granting authority. And in this respect, I would like to recall that there are some legal limitations to the amendment that you can introduce in that regard. So an amendment cannot call into question the decision that was taken to award the grant. The amendment cannot breach the principle of equal treatment between the beneficiaries, and it cannot have neither for effect to no longer comply with the criteria of eligibility or selection of your action, and the amendment must comply with the legal framework of Horizon Europe. So there are also some changes which do not require an amendment of the grant agreement, and this is notably the case for the budget transfers, which are covered by the budget flexibility. This concerns mainly the grants which are reimbursed on the basis of actual costs, c'est-à-dire real costs that the beneficiary actually incurs, reports, and on which they are reimbursed. So in here, we are not necessarily referring to lump sum grants. So budget flexibility is based on the fact that the budget, which is defined in Annex 2 of the grant agreement, is only an estimation. This means in practice that beneficiaries can transfer budget from a beneficiary to another beneficiary or to an affiliated entity. This also means that a transfer of budget is possible between budget categories, and this is between most of the budget categories. However, be careful with the budget categories, notably in relation to subcontracting and also to the specific cost category, which are under the column D, meaning internally invoiced goods and services, procurement, financial support to third parties. Because here, most of the time, the budget requires budget transfer requires an amendment of the grant. Let's take an example. At the end of the reporting period, one beneficiary has incurred less cost than he estimated at first in his budget. So he can transfer cost to another budget category or to another beneficiary. And in practice, he will do this by reporting the costs, which are different from what was in the estimated budget, and he will provide an explanation in the report. However, there are limits to the budget transfer. First of all, no amendment for budget transfer are required, but it is under the condition that it does not imply changes in the action which is described in Annex 1, meaning that a budget transfer is a simple transfer of budget, meaning no tasks are involved here. The second element is that you cannot increase the maximum amount of your grant. The granting authority has a budget available which is set as the beginning of the action, and this amount cannot be changed during the duration of the action. Now, let's make also a last point on this budget transfer. What you need to know is be aware that in case of budget transfer, or if there is a kind of discussion about that, the granting authorities will always consider the Annex 2 to make the assessment. So in case there would be outstanding debt with the Commission. So on top of budget transfer, there are other changes which are not requiring any amendment. This is, for instance, the situation where a participant, a beneficiary, or an affiliate entity would need to change the name or its address. This can be done directly in the portal. Likewise, for universal takeover, and by universal takeover, all the right and obligation of an entity is taken over by another entity. This means that the initial entity ceases to exist. Here, there is no need to introduce an amendment, just to report this event in the participant portal. And the last element where no amendment is requested is also the change of the bank's name or the bank address of one of the participants. This can be done in the portal, but again, except for the bank account of the coordinator, because, as I said, it is provided in the datasheet of the grant agreement. So this was the overview I would like to present you today, and this was the main element from the legal perspective. And what I would like to remind you as a conclusion is, bear in mind that if you are considering an amendment and you are not sure whether an amendment is required, do not hesitate to contact your project officer and discuss the matter with it. Thank you very much for attending this session this morning, and in particular following my presentation. And my colleague Selene Gonzalez-Diaz, who is also a legal officer in the Common Legal Support Service, will now join me to reply to your questions.
Thank you very much, Angélique. We are receiving already a lot of questions, but we are going to hold them until the end of the presentation, the next presentation. So we will answer all questions about amendments together. Just as a reminder, you know that you can ask questions, in slido.com, and the code is Horizon 3. We have here already Agnese BOSCAROL. She was already here from the very beginning, and she will introduce you the business process and IT tools for amendments. Agnese?
Good morning, and thank you for joining this webinar. Could we, Manuel, check the presentation, because I can't see it? Thank you.
We cannot see the presentation over there in the other screen.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, perfect now, thank you.
So, good morning, everybody. My name is Agnese, and in this session, I will present to you the main features of the process and guide you through the different technical steps of the preparation and submission of an amendment request. In today's presentation, I will use some of the questions we receive often to help me in better outlining how the process is designed. Of course, as Manuel said, we will have definitely plenty of time to reply to any other question you might have at the end of my presentation. So let's make a start with the key business features of the process, which is fully managed online, as we already pointed out. An amendment can be requested by both parties, meaning the consortium and the granting authority. So the system is designed to allow both parties to submit a request for an amendment. The time frame: a request can be submitted after the signature of the grant agreement, also before the start date of the action, and before the end date of the project. The process is time-bound, meaning that the receiving party has 45 days to react. In the context of a consortium submitted request, bear in mind that all beneficiaries can collaborate in drafting the request, but it is only the coordinator who signs and submits. An amendment request consists of a structured set of information, meaning the changes that you introduce directly in the portal, and a set of documents: the request letter, which describes the reasons why you are requesting to amend your agreement, and summarize all the changes that you have introduced in the system. Then we have the amendment core, which represents the legal document listing the clauses amending the grant agreement, and all supporting documents. In this regard, you might have already noticed that there's a new feature, a generic upload feature, under the Documents section, which allows you to submit any supporting document which might complement your request for amendment. For example, as Angélique mentioned, the change of coordinator requires a set of documents, and you can use this functionality to provide the granting authority with the necessary documents. The workflow of a consortium initiated request consists of 6 steps, which include the mandatory revision by the EU services before the signature and submission. Here I've marked 2 time limits. One, it is for the cancellation. You can cancel your draft version until the EU revision, or in other words, until before you sign your amendment request. A second limit in time is the limit for withdrawal. you can withdraw your requests until the EU services has countersigned your request. How you can submit and prepare your amendment request. So log in the funding tender portal, you select the agreement you would like to amend, you click on Action, Manage Project, and you will be redirected to this familiar landing page, which contains all the processes related to the project, both ongoing processes and closed processes. If you hit the button Launch New Interaction with the EU, a pop-up window will appear. You see the first one in the list. Be aware that the system automatically proposes you to start drafting your requests using the latest legal data available stored in the system. However, you might have a second option in case you have recently withdrawn an amendment request. In this case, the system allows you to launch a new amendment request using the set of data that were available at the moment you had withdrawn your amendment request. Once you have completed this step, the system is ready for you to start introducing all the necessary changes. Here in the upper part of this screenshot, you will see different tabs containing all the information about your grant agreement. The first one contains the amendment information. Most of the fields are automatically filled in by the system, but there's one important box. You'll see it here highlighted in red. In this box, you have to enter a narrative text describing, justifying why you would like to amend your grant agreement, which are the reasons, which impact the changes I'm proposing will have on the implementation of the action, and whether, for example, my request entails any change in the estimated budget. There is no standard template for this part. I advise you to use a clear structure, a plain language, and make sure, this is the most important thing to do, make sure that your justification summarizes, includes all the changes that you have introduced in the system. The text you enter here is automatically retrieved by the system to generate the request letter, one of the documents we mentioned before, and which are part of the amendment package. In the lower part of the screen, you see that you have the list of amendment clauses, meaning all the changes that are possible and available. The list of available amendments is described along with mandatory and optional combinations in the amendment guide, which I advise you to consult before drafting your request. Be aware that one single amendment request might include several changes, and as a consequence, one single amendment request might have a combination of several amendment clauses. You might have already noticed that for some of the changes, there's a box next to them which your project officer can activate in case they would like to flag your request for an amendment as an error amendment. This functionality offered by the system serves to repair mistakes that are noticed late in the workflow. So they repair mistakes, for example, in the project name. During the grant agreement preparation, you didn't notice that there's a typo in the name of your project, in the title of your project. In this sense, you can use in agreement with your project officer this functionality. One last point on the classification of the amendment clauses. Most of them are grouped into automatic, meaning that you don't have to select the clause in order to be able to introduce changes to project data. You just introduce the changes and the system automatically triggers the selection of the clause. Few of them are to be selected manually, as you see on the right side, on the right hand of the screen. So, to see how you can prepare your amendment request, I've chosen a practical example, which is the beneficiary termination. So you open the tab beneficiaries, you have the list of all participants to your grant agreement, and next to the beneficiary you have a gray arrow. If you click on that, this will trigger the selection of amendment clause 84, which is in most cases normally combined with the change of Annex 1, then 8021, and the change of Annex 2. I've introduced a note here concerning the so-called portability. So you know that, for example, ERC grantees, they have the possibility to change their hosting institution. Under Horizon Europe, this is done through a combination of different amendment clauses. So we don't have anymore available in the system one specific amendment clause. So you have to combine the addition of a new beneficiary, the change of coordinator, and if the former coordinator leaves the project, also include 84. So once you have decided and confirmed that you would like to terminate that beneficiary, the system prompts you to enter another very important piece of information, which is the exit date or the end of work date of the beneficiary. In other words, the last working day of the beneficiary leaving the consortium. You have three possibilities. You can choose a fixed date, meaning a fixed date after the submission of the amendment request, or a fixed date which is set before the submission of your amendment request. Or you can opt for the day after the submission of the request, or the date of the entry into force of this amendment. Based on the information you have provided for the exit date, the system automatically calculates the termination date. And since the termination date can be only in the future, the system will choose between a fixed date or the date of entry into force of the amendment, whichever is the latest. Now, you've entered the end of work date, you had introduced any other change under the relevant tab, for example, work packages, the living beneficiary was leading one of your work packages and now you have to reallocate activities. All changes are introduced. Under documents, there is one very important document that you have to upload, which is the opinion letter of the living beneficiary. If for any reason you forget to upload this document, the system automatically blocks and prevents you from submitting the amendment request. Just a reminder, once the beneficiary termination is set, the amendment is signed, the system triggers another process, which is the termination reporting process for the beneficiary who has left the consortium. The coordinator and the beneficiary will receive an automatic notification. Now, before we move to the next screens and the next steps of the preparation and submission, I would like to draw your attention to some questions we receive frequently on changes in the consortium composition. Angélique has already referred to those changes in her presentation. So here I'm just focusing on the technicalities, so how you can introduce those changes. An affiliated entity. Is it possible to include an affiliated entity during the project? Any change must be notified to the granting authority, so as they will be able to assess the admissibility of the request. Your amendment, in this case, should combine different clauses: the addition of the affiliated entity, the change of Annex 1, and, if relevant, the change of Annex 2. Make sure that in the justification box you specify the reasons, any possible impact on the implementation of the action, and any shift of amounts in the estimated budget. Another question, a second question we receive quite often is whether a beneficiary can be added before the submission of the amendment. As I've just described in the case of the removal termination of a beneficiary, the system will ask you to define a start date of work for the new beneficiary, affiliated entity, or associated partner. So in this sense, as we have seen that we can choose a fixed date which is set before the submission of the amendment, then for the start date we can choose a fixed date which is before the submission of the amendment. Once again, here I'm just explaining the technicalities of and how the system works, and not entering into the legal details and whether your amendment request will be accepted or not. Another change, associated partner who would like to leave the consortium after the grant agreement is signed. Yes, you have to communicate via an amendment, and you can use the 87 to remove the associated partner. Other additional two changes that might happen in the consortium composition, and which were already mentioned by Angélique. Partial transfers of rights and obligations. The annotated multi-grant agreement provides for different examples, but how you do that in practice? You add a new beneficiary, you might terminate the previous entity, then you change Annex 1 and you change Annex 2. In this case, please make sure that you specify in your request letter that the change is due to a partial transfer, and use the additional generic upload functionality to provide the necessary supporting documents. Contrary to partial transfers, universal takeovers do not need an amendment request as in the form that we are describing now. It's a simple information procedure. You have just to modify the data of your organization as they are registered in the participant register. Let's now move on. What happens once you have prepared your request and you are ready to submit it for review? So the draft version of your request must be reviewed by your project officer. You lock it for review, only the coordinator can perform this action, and you submit for EU revision. What happens? The EU, the granting authority, assess your request. If they agree, everything is perfect, it's in line, then the coordinator receives a notification to sign the amendment. If not, the granting authority sends the coordinator back the request along with the explanation and comments, suggesting what should be revised. In this case, a new loop, prepare, lock, and revise is launched. Once you have the final version as approved by the project officer, then you can sign, the coordinator can sign and submit the request. The submission triggers the clock for the 45 days for the receiving party to react. The amendment is signed, the process then ends, and you will be able to retrieve all the relevant documents, one consolidated version of the amendment and a single file composing the amendment request. If your request is rejected, then you will receive a letter describing the reasons why. I mentioned at the very beginning that you can choose to cancel your amendment request. This can be done any moment before the coordinator signs the request. So just hit on the button cancel amendment and the file will be processed under archived processes. Second option, you might want to withdraw your request. Then in this case, after your signature by the coordinator and before the counter signature of the granting authority, you can withdraw your request. I have chosen 4 additional frequently, I would say, asked questions that really pertain how the system works. The first one is about the possibility to prepare 2 different amendments in parallel. So this is technically possible, but I will not recommend you to do so. This is why you can submit only 1 amendment request at a time. The second amendment request can be submitted provided that the previous one is signed or rejected. In other words, the process, the workflow of the previous amendment request has come to an end. So if you start working on a parallel request, therefore you might be working not have available the latest legal data. A second question we receive concerning the procedure is whether amending a grant in actual cost is the same as in lump sum grants. Yes, the procedure is exactly the same, meaning that you log in, you launch the request of an amendment, you introduce the necessary changes, you provide the reasons why, and you submit your request. So the procedure technically is exactly the same. When after the closure of a reporting period can the amendment process start? So a request for an amendment can be submitted as soon as you receive the payment confirmation letter. But in this case, I strongly advise you to coordinate with your project officer. This is why amendments can have a really tight interaction with the reporting process, whether interim or final. The submission of an amendment request is indeed blocked when you are working on a technical and financial reporting, in case the changes you would like to propose entailed the change of coordinator, the change of the bank account of the coordinator, the reporting periods, meaning their duration or their type, whether interim or final, and the action duration. In this case, you will not be able to autonomously proceed and submit your request. This is why the communication with your project officer is essential to agree on the appropriate steps to be taken. One last point is what happens when you receive a request for amendment which is initiated by your granting authority. You receive a communication, a notification with all the changes proposed, and you are bound to the same time limit to react to the request for an amendment. Guidance documents. You have available on the portal the online manual detailing, describing all the full process and whether there are any specificities for some of the changes. The amendment guide, I already mentioned before, and the annotated model grant agreement, the current version for Article 39 governing amendments, provides with plenty of examples. Take a last message. Check out the guidance material I've just mentioned. Please avoid belated requests, so requests that are very far from the event that might have an impact on your project implementation, or changes that come very close to an end of the grant agreement. Use, as I said, and concise and clear language in the formulation of your request. And once again, please make sure that all the changes that you have introduced directly in the system are summarized in your request letter. And once again, collaborate with your project officer. Anytime you have a doubt whether, for example, an amendment is necessary or not, get in touch with them before launching an amendment and taking action. With this, I've completed my presentation, so now we can take your questions.
Thank you very much, Agnese. And we have plenty of questions, and I will ask our colleagues in the technical room to publish them on the screen so we can read them there. I imagine that Selene and Angélique are still there, connected through Teams. And something I didn't mention before, sorry, you are a policy officer here at the Common Implementation Center. Agnese is a policy officer. So, actually, yeah, there. So I can read the slides, actually, the questions just in front of me. Is there a maximum percentage of budget flexibility? And I think that's a more legal question, unless you want to give it a try, Agnese.
No, it's okay.
Legal question.
Yeah, there.
Angélique, are you there?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. I am Selene. I am here to complement my colleagues Angélique and Agnese for the Q&A session. So I will take the first question. And the answer would be no. In principle, there is no specific percentage or quantitative limit in Horizon Europe for the budget flexibility. As explained by my colleague Angélique, this is based on the fact that your budget is an estimation, so it will remain in principle flexible. We don't have a maximum percentage as such, but what you always have to remember is that your limit is that the budget flexibility cannot result in a substantial change of the description of your action. So here it's the limit. You always have to think if you are just shifting budget or you are also changing your Annex 1, and then in that case, it will require an amendment. But the simple answer would be no, there is not maximum percentage as such.
Thank you very much, Selene. I didn't mention it before, Selene is a legal officer also at the Common Implementation Center. So for the next question, and I will ask my colleagues actually to put it just in front of me, otherwise I have to look to the right and it will be a kind of awkward. Does a shift of PMs from one work package to another for a particular beneficiary require an amendment? Budget remains the same. And that's probably also a legal question. Selene, if you are there.
Yes, I am here. Here we are talking about a change on the person months in one work package to another, maybe because you realize that in one work package you will need more effort, more human effort, and you would like to transfer some person months there. Normally, this would fall under the budget flexibility. So in principle, it would not require an amendment. But again, we have to bear in mind always the principle as are we really just shifting the person months, or would also entail a change, a substantial change of the task. But if it's just a shift of person months and the budget remain the same, this would in principle not require an amendment and be covered by the budget flexibility rule.
Thank you. The next question is, where can we learn more about the rules around budget flexibility?
So here we continue with budget flexibility. So this rule, you will find it in your grant agreement, actually. It's Article 5.5. You can learn more about it by consulting the documents. I will also like to mention one important guidance document that we have in Horizon Europe. And for those who don't know it, it's the Annotated Grant Agreement, as we call it, the AGA. And this is a very important piece of guidance where we explain every article of your grant agreement. And there, in the annotations of Article 5.5, you would find more information about budget flexibility and also some examples. So I really encourage you to go to the Funding and Tenders portal. You will find this document under the guidance documents and consult the annotations.
Thank you. We have now a question from Camille. I need to add a third party to the grant agreement because my coordinator is changing institutions, but will still coordinate the project. How do we add a third party?
I will maybe take this one. Here, I understand that the person, so Camille is talking about the coordinator as a physical person. And that I understand that this person would be probably recruited by another entity. And if I understand correctly, this entity recruiting this person would be added as a third party to the grant in order to allow the person to continue coordinate the project. So this is what I understand from the question. Several points on that from a legal point of view. First of all, the coordinator normally is a legal entity. it is true that in this legal entity there are some person in charge of the coordination, but the fact is that the coordinator is a legal entity. This means that here I understand that there would be a change of coordinator. So this is the first point to be considered. And when you consider a change of coordinator, please be very careful, because the coordinator is a crucial piece of the grant, because the coordinator is the interlocutor of the granting authority. Everything via us goes the coordinator. So if you have to change the coordinator and to involve another entity, please consider all the implications which may have. So for this specific questions, this particular case, I can only recommend that you contact your project officer and you discuss this point, because in here it's not just about adding a third party, which is possible provided that it comply with the work program, with the call condition, and with the grant agreement. In here, it's much more complex. To what I understand, it would be about replacing a coordinator. So I suggest that first there is a discussion with the policy officer in charge to discuss maybe further this question.
Thank you, Angélique. The next question also is a legal point of view. A beneficiary with affiliated entities is leaving the project, but the affiliated entities want to stay in the consortium. What options do we have, or do they have?
I can give it a start, maybe. So I understand from the question that beneficiary is leaving the consortium and it has linked some affiliated entities. So normally, yes, it would require the termination of the beneficiary, and normally it also leads to the removal of its affiliated entity, whom it has a legal or a capital link. However, if the affiliated entity still wants to remain in the project and would like to continue working for the action, it could be foreseen to have an amendment to maybe change this affiliated entity role and add it as a new beneficiary in the action. So this could be one of the options that could be explored. Of course, this is provided that the affiliated entity would comply with the eligibility conditions, meaning that this entity will be still eligible for participating and for funding. But one of the options they could have would be maybe to be added as a new beneficiary.
Thank you, Selene. The next question is, if a beneficiary is involved in other tasks or work packages than expected in the description of action, is amendment needed? Budget will be covered within the budget flexibility. Selene
So
or Angélique?
It is what we explained a little bit earlier. Budget flexibility covers only budget transfers, meaning that as the moment where you have a transfer of task or a reallocation of task, it is not budget flexibility anymore. So in here, in this particular case, we would recommend to consider a possible amendment, because in here, I understand that there would be a reshuffle of tasks which would require to be reflected in the Annex 1 of the grant agreement. So again, when considering budget flexibility, consider whether it is just about transferring money from a category to another, or whether it implies as well a transfer of some task, which in that case is not budget flexibility.
Thank you. The next question, if a prolongation of the duration of a task is needed, do we need an amendment?
I can take this one. Normally, a change in the project duration is possible, and normally it will always require an amendment of the grant agreement, because this is a specific data that it's in your grant, in your data sheet. So normally, yes, it would require an amendment. The limit here, I would say, however, you would have to think if really you are thinking about a substantial prolongation, substantial change. As we explained in the presentation, you always have to think that this change cannot call into question the decision awarding your grant. So it's just it's a prolongation because I don't know, some circumstances you have to prolong the project duration. That is possible and would require an amendment, but the limit would be that this would not change an important feature of your proposal that would call into question the award decision or maybe breach the principle of equal treatment between applicants. But the short answer would be yes, amendment is needed.
Thank you.
But if I may compliment Manuel on this point, because Selene addressed the question of the duration of the action, but maybe here, if the person is just talking about a duration of a task, a single task, in that case, the prolongation can be envisaged. For instance, it was planned that the task lasts for 12 months, and it happens that in the end it will be 14 or 15 months. In that particular case, an amendment is not necessarily needed. However, you will have to explain why it took you 3 months in the reporting. So in here, we can see both situations depending on the real context of the question, which is, are we talking about a single task or are we talking about the duration of the full action?
Thank you very much, both of you. If the data sheet specifies that equipment can only be reported as depreciation, is an amendment necessary to report 100% of equipment for pilot or demonstration purposes?
Here we are talking about equipment cost, and it's a bit tricky situation because in the case of equipment, you always have to read the call conditions applicable to your project. Why? Because maybe I will give some background. The default rule in Horizon Europe is that equipment costs will always be reimbursed as a depreciation cost, meaning that the general rule, the default rule, is that you will only be able to charge your equipment cost as depreciation. And that's the situation that I understand you have in your grant agreement. And now you are considering a shift to charge this cost at full cost, but you have to bear in mind that this option is only possible for you if it was allowed in the call conditions of your topic. So it's not as simple as making an amendment. You really have to check the call conditions that are applicable to your particular project, and you have to see if in the specific conditions a full cost option for your equipment was allowed, was foreseen, and in that case you would be allowed to charge full cost. But if this specific question was not, this specific option to declare full cost was not explicitly mentioned in your call conditions, you will not be able to charge full cost, and then you will not need to require an amendment because those costs will not be eligible. So my advice is always check the call conditions and always remember that the general rule in Horizon Europe is depreciation cost.
Thank you. The next question is, a beneficiary is leaving and there is one or more tasks that need to be subcontracted, as no one in the consortium has the required expertise. Is it possible?
So in here, we understand that it is a particular case where the consortium has no expertise anymore because of the termination of this beneficiary. So as a best practice, for the time being, what we would recommend is, first of all, to contact the project officer to inform them of the situation, because this is an important element. And what can we say more broadly about subcontracting activities? The first element is that subcontracting activities must be set out in the Annex 1 of the grant agreement, c'est-à-dire in the description of the action. Therefore, any change regarding subcontracting, or which can be a change of an existing subcontract or an introduction of a subcontracting task should be reflected and is not, of course, part of the budget flexibility. And in here, the grant agreement offers two possibilities regarding subcontracting. Either the grant is amended, or the consortium can choose the simplified approval procedure. However, it is important to note that for the simplified approval procedure, this means that the change will be reported at the time of the reporting stage, but the consortium will bear the risk that the change and the cost are rejected by the granting authority. So here, considering the particular situation and that is described in the question, we would recommend that the consortium liaise with the policy officer in charge of the grant.
Thank you. We have now a question that is coming in every single Horizon implementation day. When will the real AGA be available?
Maybe I can start.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes, the AGA is real. Okay, it's not not fictitious. As it was explained by my colleague at the beginning of its presentation, maybe for giving a bit of a background, the AGA is based on your in the model grant agreement, right? And the model grant agreement, it's a corporate document, meaning that it uses a template that is used across the board for all the EU directly managed grants. It means that the AGA goes beyond Horizon Europe. It's a guidance document that will serve a lot of programs. In this sense, it's drafting. It's a continuous process. It's a process that requires the input for many commission services, and it's still ongoing. So the main message would be that you already have a valuable and important part of the AGA already published. Notably, you have the annotations on cost, which are very important for our beneficiaries. You have stable annotations for the participants, and you also have annotations regarding the amendments, which is the topic of today's presentation. You can consult them in Article 39. And even though this is a draft document, we believe that it can serve you and it can be a valuable guidance for you. So unfortunately, we don't have a specific timeline, but we can say it's work in progress, and we are continuously working on updating it. But please, for the time being, just rely on the annotations of Article 39. You can also consult the amendment guide, which is available. And unfortunately, we don't have a specific date.
Thank you, Selene. We still have a couple of minutes for one or two questions. A third party will second personnel during the project, but is not mentioned in the grant agreement. Should this be added through an amendment? What if it is a company with a capital link to a beneficiary? And that's a legal question too.
Yes, maybe I will give it a start. Here we are talking about personnel that will work in your project. And I understand that you are referring to a situation where a third party, which is outside of your grant, will second a person to a beneficiary because this person it's necessary to perform some tasks in your project. Here we are talking about seconded personnel. And what is important in Horizon Europe is to remember that we don't have any more a specific article concerning where you have to identify the seconded personnel against payment. So this type of data will not be available in your grant agreement. You don't have to mention them. You don't have to list them. And normally this situation could fall under a budget flexibility, and it will not require amendments because provided that we are talking just on a shift of budget, we are still in the personnel cost category, and you will be changing budget, for instance, from an employee that was going to perform this task to seconded personnel against payment. So if it's just a minor shift of a budget in this category, and if it's not substantial, it would not require an amendment. However, I insist here that you would always have to think whether this would change the description of the action. What part of the action will this person carry out? Because maybe it was an important task that it was foreseen for the beneficiary to carry out, and now it would be shifted to a third party. So you have to assess on a case by case whether it's just a simple shift of the budget of personnel, or it will really mean a substantial change that will affect your action. So once again, in this case, I would recommend that you contact your project officer and then you consult them on this specific case.
Thank you,
And then I
Selene.
think there was a second part of the question was whether if the company had a capital link with the beneficiary. And in that case, you might consider whether the role of an affiliated entity will be more appropriate for this person, because if the entity have a capital or a legal link with the beneficiary, maybe it would be more easy, more straightforward to have them as an affiliated entity, in which case this would always require an amendment because it's the addition of a new participant.
Thank you very much. We still have time for one last question, and this one I think is for Agnese. What is the process when the coordinator of the project changes institutions?
Yes, I understand that this question is similar to the previous one Angélique has replied to from a legal point of view. So if we are, I might have two different replies. If we are in the context of an ERC grant, for example, so with the coordinator, you mean the scientist, the ERC grantee, who might decide to change their hosting institution, then in this case we have the addition of a new beneficiary, maybe the removal of the previous beneficiary, and the change of coordinator. So is AT1, AT4, and AT11. And the amendment guide that you find under supporting reference documents on the portal, you have the description of the different documents that you have to combine. But if we are referring to a scientist, to a PI in a multi-beneficiary project, then this entails the fact that the coordinator, I should understand here in your question, that the coordinator is the legal entity who has signed the grant agreement. And as Angélique already stressed before, you should carefully consider this change, because this means that in practice the process works exactly the same. So you have to add a new beneficiary, terminate the previous beneficiary, and change the coordinator. But also, so the amendment clauses are exactly the same, 1, 4, and 11. But the context is different and might be quite complex from the legal point of view.
Thank you very much, Agnese, Angélique, and Selene, for answering all these questions and for your presentations. We are now going to move on, and before actually passing at the second part, that is reporting and payments, I would like to remind everybody that these webinars are always recorded. You can go to the events page in the Funding and Tenders portal, and there you have all future and past events we have held, and all the information, agenda, supporting documents, presentations, and the recording are available there for you to review. So for the next part, actually, we have reporting and payments, and as before, we have two sections. First, the legal part, and after, the business part. So we are going to start now with the first part. The first part is the legal basis, avoiding common errors in reporting and payments. And we have our colleague from the Common Implementation Center, Ioannis KASTRISIANAKIS. I hope I said it correctly. He's a lawyer in the Common Implementation Center, and he's joining us through Teams. Ioannis, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
If you can share your presentation.
Can you see my screen?
I cannot, but I don't know if the colleagues there can.
Can you see my screen?
So far, no. Yeah, it seems something is going on there. Here you are. The floor is yours then, Ioannis.
Okay. Now?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Peter, for the introduction. Welcome to this session. My name is Ioannis KASTRISIANAKIS, and just like my colleagues Angélique and Selene, I'm working for the CLSS as a legal officer in TGRTT. Today I will make a presentation on reporting and payments from a legal point of view. My colleague Petros later will give some insights from the IT sides. And I will try to present some aspects that we should take into consideration, some key features and important deadlines. As you can imagine, these two elements, the reporting and periods and payments, in your grant agreement are very connected, meaning that what will take place at the reporting stage will normally have an impact also in your payment. As regards our legal base, we refer to Articles 21 and 22 of Horizon Europe Model Grant Agreement. And one thing I would like to point out before we start this presentation is that our presentation will focus only on actual cost model grant agreement. Will not touch lump sum aspects, because there the reporting is very different. And let's start with the reporting. So in these slides, as we can see, there are two types of
Ioannis, excuse me, if you can say next slide each time, because they have to switch it from the studio.
Okay, sorry.
No problem, thank you.
Sorry. As we can see from this slide, there are two types of reporting to be handled when implementing action stemming from Article 21. The first one is continuous reporting module, meaning over the period, over the action duration. It is a more or less a regular update about certain elements of the project. And we have the periodic reporting module. At certain points of the implementation, the beneficiary will have to explain the work carried out and also report on the costs incurred. One thing that I would like to point out is that these two types are interlinked, meaning that what you will have reported during the continuous reporting module will fill in the periodic report, and especially more specifically the part A of the periodic reporting. Next slide, please. So here, let's now dig more into these two types of reporting. As regards continuous reporting, beneficiaries will have to provide regular updates on certain elements, such as the deliverables, milestones, outputs, and outcomes, some critical risks that you have foreseen, or if there are new legal risks coming, and certain indicators or information which are linked to a specific EU program. For example, for Horizon Europe, you will have to report about elements touching IPR, communication and dissemination activities. And you will have to report this according to the timing conditions already set out in your proposal and in your description of the action. Now, concerning the periodic reporting, it consists, first of all, from Part A, which will be stemming, as we already mentioned, from the continuous reporting, what you have already filled in continuous reporting module, and Part B, which is the narrative part. There you will have to upload a PDF about the progress made in the action. There is also the financial aspect of the implementation that you have to report. Here, the financial part will look different in terms of information provided to the granting authority, depending on whether we are talking for an additional pre-financing, if there are in your grant agreement, or an interim or a final payment. If it is foreseen in your grant agreement that you have another pre-financing, meaning a second pre-financing, you will have to provide a statement on the use of the previous pre-financing payment to check whether you have used the previous pre-financing. We will refer at a later stage more concretely. If you are reaching an interim payment, you will have to provide to the granting authority with individual financial statements. There will be individually per beneficiary and affiliated entities, and you will have to explain about the use of resources and provide costs explanations. If we are at the final payment, you will probably have to submit certificates on financial statements, the so-called CFS, but it's only provided at the final stage, and if a certain threshold of the EU contribution requested is reached. Let's move to the next slide. So let's have some I would like to provide some extra insights, extra features regarding the reporting area. In your grant agreement, you will notice that there is the data sheet, which is a summary of your of several aspects of your grant agreement. As regards the modalities and schedules concerning the reporting and payment, you have a dedicated section, notably section 4 of the datasheet, and point 1 is about the continuous reporting, and point 2 is about the periodic reporting. The financial statement has to be in euro. This is stemming from Article 21.3 of Horizon Europe Model Grant Agreement. And as regards the language of the reporting, must be in the language of the grant agreement. In general, it will be in English. Let's move to the other slide. So, of course, you have to be aware of the consequences of non-compliance, notably Article 21.5, and more specifically, if the report doesn't comply with the provision of this article, the granting authority may suspend the payment deadline according to Article 32, and take measures described in Chapter 5. As regards the coordinator, additionally, if the coordinator fails to meet its reporting obligations, such as to submit the reports, inform the granting authority on the distribution of the payments, the granting authority may terminate the grant or the coordinator's participation. And of course, the granting authority can apply measures described in Chapter 5. Let's move to the next section of our presentation, which concerns payments. Let's move to the next slide. Let's see some payments general features. As we said, in your grant agreement, there is the data sheet, which is a summary of your main aspects of your grant agreement. Under point 4.2, there is a table that summarizes the schedule and modalities to request payments and when these payments will be done. Payments will be handled through the coordinator, who, as we already mentioned, Angélique has mentioned, is the main interlocutor and the link between the consortium and the granting authority. After reporting stage, the payment will be made in euro in the bank account of the coordinator, which is also mentioned in the data sheet. And of course, the coordinator has to distribute the payments to the members of the consortium without unjustified delay. There might be the case that you may have already agreed internally how the payments will be distributed according to the signed consortium agreement. But this is at the level of the consortium. Let's move to the next slide. Here we have the payment schedule, as you will see, with all the necessary deadlines. We have several payments calculated at different stages during the implementation of the action. You will have a pre-financing. You will have a pre-financing, and maybe if depending on your grant agreement and the action, you may have also additional pre-financing. You will have also interim payments or two, depends on the action duration of the project. And at the end of the project, we will release the final payment. Let's dig now more into each category of payments. Let's move to the other next slide and see some key features. As regards the pre-financing, what is the pre-financing? The pre-financing is to provide to the consortium a float in order to start smoothly and run the project. Legally speaking, it remains the property of the EU until the final payment. So it is an advanced payment made to you in order to start the action. As we already said, depending on the action, an extra pre-financing payment is also possible. As already indicated previously, we will ask you for a declaration on the use of the initial pre-financing, and more specifically, we will ask you to inform us whether you have used 70% of this pre-financing received. Then we will adjust the release of the second pre-financing according to the declaration. What practically will be done is that if it is less than 70%, what you used during the previous pre-financing, there will be a reduction by the difference between the 70% threshold and the amount used. Let's move to the next slide. As regards interim payments, you will have to provide us with individual financial statements. For this, you have to use the model of individual financial statements, which is in your grant agreement, and notably is the Annex 4, which is more or less reflecting Annex 2, which is the budget table in terms of cost categories, what kind of costs you can declare. You have to explain what are your costs, what are the costs you have incurred so far at the interim period stage. What we will do as a granting authority is that we will calculate the total accepted EU contribution based on your cost statements, and we will apply a limit, a ceiling to this interim payment. In Horizon Europe, this ceiling is also reflected in the datasheet. It is 90% of the maximum grant amount. We will therefore keep 10% and actually a little bit more because we have also the 5% of retention for the so-called mutual insurance mechanism. In the end, you will receive around 85 before the final payment. And let's move to the next slide, which concerns the final payment. Here, there will be 3 stages of calculation. Calculation of the total accepted EU contribution. Also based on your financial statements, the cost that you have declared throughout the duration of the action. We will cap it to the limit of the maximum grant amount reflected in the grant agreement, and we will apply, if it is the case, a reduction due to the non-profit rule. The non-profit rules now comes at the final stage into play. So therefore, we will calculate the final amount due, and actually we will calculate the balance. We will compare the final amount due, what you already received via pre-financing and interim payments. And as a conclusion, if the balance is positive, for the consortium, the granting authority will release the payment. Otherwise, if the balance is negative, meaning that you have received too much as compared to what you declared, and the amounts you have received, there will be a recovery according to Article 22.2 of Horizon Europe Model Grant Agreement. I would like also to point out a specific case that concerns the termination of a beneficiary according to Article 32. There, in this specific case, according to Article 22.32, we will have to calculate the amount due to the beneficiary whose participation is terminated. In this situation, you will be asked to you will ask an amendment to terminate the participation of the beneficiary, as already explained my colleague Angélique previously. You will have to provide the financial statement of the beneficiary and the statement of what has already been paid to this beneficiary by the coordinator. Then the granting authority will calculate the balance, meaning compare what the beneficiary received from the coordinator in terms of distribution of payments and what is entitled to according to the costs declared. If the balance is positive, the granting authority will include this amount in the next interim or final payment of the consortium. If the balance is negative, meaning that the beneficiary whose participation is terminated received too much as compared to what he is entitled to, the amount will be recovered according to Article 22.2. So here, I think we have reached the end of my presentation, and I give the floor to my colleague Petros, who will take care of the IT aspects.
Thank you very much, Ioannis. We have already plenty of questions for you, but first we are going to the next presentation, and we'll take all questions together at the very end of Petros' presentation. So we have here in the studio with us Petros BELSIS. He's a policy officer at the Common Implementation Center, and he will introduce us for the reporting and payments, the business process, and the IT tool. Petros.
Thank you, Manuel, and welcome to all our participants. So indeed, we will start with the technical part on Horizon Europe reporting.
How was it?
So I will just go through the main principles, although they were already covered. So you know that the Commission has an obligation to monitor the activities of the projects in order to assess that the implementation of the project goes as described in the Annex 1 of the grant agreement, and to check the eligibility of the cost claimed. In order also the Commission to verify that the process and the project is implemented correctly, beneficiaries must submit any information requested, and of course, in particular, the deliverables and the reports. Now, the monitoring of the project implementation is a continuous task. So it starts from the moment you start your action. So indeed, you need to start, once you have something concrete and the results, you need to report to them and provide information. But it also becomes more relevant in specific time periods, so when the reporting period has elapsed, so when you need to submit what we call the periodic reports. After that, the project officer will review the outcome of your report, and they will also assess concerning the payments and the costs you have claimed. And of course, for the deliverables, very often they require the expertise of external experts in the field. So we have two reporting modules. They are connected, as we will explain in the next slides. So the continuous reporting module starts immediately it's open from the moment that you sign the grant. So it is available, and you can start submitting publications or other data policy related. And at specific time periods, we have the periodic reports. So the periodic reports are already defined I would just go a little more. No, sure. No, I had the next slide. So the periodic reports, they are defined already. It was explained also in the previous presentation in the data sheet. So once the period elapses, then the new module, the periodic report, is open for submission of the periodic reports. And then you have also at the end of the project, you have a final report. What consists of the continuous reporting module? So in brief, you will have separate tabs that we will explain in detail. There is the project summary. You can submit deliverables. You can report on the milestones that were already defined from the proposal that you have submitted. Then also on the risks, you can follow up and update the situation, what concerns the risk. And of course, we have some horizontal, let's say, issues that you need to report to submit publications, open access related data sets and other results. And then you need to report on dissemination or communication activities and some policy questionnaires. This is always available from the moment the project has started. And then we have also the periodic reporting module, which consists of the technical part, which is the same like the continuous reporting module. So whatever you have reported already in the continuous reporting will be in the technical part. And on top of that, you have to submit a report, a document, which contains specific information explaining in detail what you have achieved and how you have progressed in the different work packages, and if there are any deviations from the description of action. And then on top of that, there is another part, the financial part, where you submit financial statements, so individual for each beneficiary and consolidated for the total of the project. Then you need to provide explanation on the use of resources, information whether you have used subcontracting, of course, if it was described in the action, and of course, if there are in-kind contributions by third parties. In specific cases, you will have to submit also certificates on the financial statements if you have already surpassed a final threshold and only at the final payment. Based on all the information that you have provided, all this consolidated, the information is consolidated, and then we create a periodic report which is submitted by the coordinator. You can always consult in the portal the templates of the periodic report, and you can find it for Horizon Europe, for example, under the project reporting templates. And now, in order to access the continuous reporting module, you log always in the portal, and then there, once you select to manage the project, you might have more than one. You will select the one that is applicable if you have more than one. And of course, you see here, we have the processes, all the processes that are available for you. We see that below the grant agreement preparation, it is completed, together, of course, following the proposal submission evaluation. And now, once your project is started, you see the continuous reporting. And once you click there, you will be transmitted in the grant management system, and the tabs that you need to fill at any moment you are ready for specific submitting the results or deliverables. So the first tab is the summary for publication. Here all the fields are mandatory. You need to fill, for example, specific information with a language that is understandable to the wider public, so it is intended for publication. And here I would like to attract your attention to be very careful in case you think that the abstract, for example, because usually you copy what is from the abstract, but if there is something that you think that is sensitive information, for example, concerning your research that is still something that you have not, let's say, protected or you plan to protect, if you have something that is sensitive information or personal information also, it should not be placed here, because this is going to be published in Cordis, so it is another website that we publish information concerning all the projects that have received funding. In respect also to these questions are similar if you were already participating in Horizon 2020. There is another question only that is added, that the fourth one, that says you need also to give some information concerning to what is the policy relevance of your project, so how it contributes to specific policies related to the call. Now, the next tab is the deliverables. Here you already have the list of deliverables that you need to be submitting, depending on also what you described in the proposal. So here you need to upload the deliverables once they are ready. So the delivery date is already defined from the proposal, and if you are not ready, if you don't reach the deadline, you will have a warning. Once you are ready to submit, then it becomes in draft state, and then you can click and submit it. What has changed is the dissemination statuses. Of course, be careful here. Normally, the default is public, so the information that is all these deliverables that are marked as public are going to be published externally. So again, be careful if you have a deliverable that contains personal data or other sensitive information. You need to contact your project officer in order to change that. Otherwise, please be aware that you shouldn't submit something that is not for public disclosure if the deliverable is already public. On the right side of the slide, you see the different deliverables. So it is pending when it is awaited. Draft ones you have uploaded, but not yet submitted. If you click the next button after uploading it, you can submit it, and then the project officer will approve or reject it. Now, before submission, you are asked to enter some comments, or they are optional. All the beneficiaries can upload the deliverable, but at the end it's only the coordinator who has the responsibility. When you click submit, the project officer will be informed, and of course, if the project officer rejects the deliverable, you will be informed. Be aware, because we receive some kind of these questions, it might take some time because maybe the project officer would like to consult the experts in order to approve the deliverable, so you might have the approval during the periodic report, when anyway there will be an organized review and the experts will help in reviewing it. The other tab, another tab is the one that contains the milestones. So milestones have already been described during the proposal and the grant agreement. Here, what you need to define is the date that you achieved the milestone, or if you have not achieved it, you can already update here the information. A question that sometimes we receive is that if associated partners can be lead beneficiaries, this we have changed, so indeed now they can be lead beneficiaries in a specific milestone. Concerning the risks, these are already again described from the proposal. So here you will have the risk. You need to update frequently the status of the risk, if it has been materialized, if you have taken the necessary countermeasures, if the risk has materialized or not, and then also it is possible, if you want to add an unforeseen risk, for example, you can have an emergency situation or something like the COVID or a physical, let's say, disaster that maybe affect or risk the implementation of the action. A tab that has been revised in comparison to what we had in Horizon 2020. So here, in principle, you need to define and list all the dissemination activities that take part of the project. So you need to put the name of the activity, then you need to select what it is, a conference, a meeting or something similar, the intended audience, and what was the purpose of this activity. So in comparison to H2020, you see that we don't have anymore this kind of numerical, let's say, approach that was there, that we don't ask you to put numbers about audience or anything, but it's more qualitative approach, and we ask you to define the dissemination activities and list them all one by one. The same is for the communication activities. So for example, you might have a media campaign, you just need to give the title of the activity and then description, what was the target audience again, and what was the aim of this specific activity. This tab is new for Horizon Europe, and yeah, in the past it was together with the dissemination activities. Now, this is a new and important one, so here I will explain a little more. So the researchers involved in the project. Here in this tab, you need to list the individual researchers who take part in the project. Some of them you already had described, for example, from the proposal. There are others who maybe during grant agreement or later in the course of, let's say, the project, you will hire more. In this table, you need to enter not every type of personnel, but all the people who are researchers. Now, if you want to find the definition of the researchers, this comes from the Frascati manual. And in this table, you see that it covers a broad range of activities. So even people who are working in industry and doing research, they can be here. We know sometimes there are people who consider themselves mostly dealing with, let's say, applied research. So I don't know, in these borderline cases you can select whether or not, but in principle all the researchers have to be there. Even you need to report people who are working in the project but their salary is covered by other sources. For example, a professor that is it is seconded for the project, but the salary is paid maybe by the research institution or the ministry. So you need to put all the research. You don't need to put here personnel that is doing administrative tasks. For example, if you have somebody in the laboratory just doing the measurements, but they are not actively engaged in the research, there you don't need to put or administrative personnel that is managing, let's say, helping you to manage the project from purely administrative point of view. The questions are necessary because they will help us evaluate the impact of the program to the research of the careers. And as you will see already, the questions, they are quite generic. They are for statistical purposes. You just need to define what is your role. For example, a main, let's say, if you actively lead the project or, just participate, contribute, if you are, what type of, let's say, researcher, if it is a full professor, associate professor, and then of course you can already provide an indication by indicating that at the end when you leave the project, if the career stage, for example, you were associate and you have become full professor, that is again an information that you can already provide. The intention of this is to cover the need from the legislation to define the impact of the framework program to the career of the researchers. And again, as we said, it's mostly for statistical purposes. Now we have some tables that already existed, and they are referring to the what so-called open access obligations, for example, to provide the publications, and of course, as you know, continuing the approach that we had in Horizon 2020, you need to always make sure that publications which are the outcome of a project funded by EU needs to be in open access. Now, there, in order to help you, we try to emphasize on some changes that happened since Horizon 2020. So, all the publications now need to be deposited in an open and fair repository, so which has specific principles. You can always look for fair, compatible repositories. And the change is that you need obligatory to take a copy of the accepted version of the journal and submit it to a repository. Why is this? You will say, but it is already open in the site, but you know that sometimes the journals are ceasing production or the publisher maybe stop producing. So maybe the website of the journal will not be always accessible while the repository will be there. So you need to know that once you receive the acceptance, you submit a copy of it in a repository in order to be compatible with the obligations. Now, again, another change is that for some disciplines in Horizon 2020, we had what we called the embargo period. So you could you had also in relation to the publisher's obligations for some discipline, you had this embargo period that you could wait for 6 months. It was, I think, for the social science and humanities until you make the copy of the article accessible. Now this obligation is no longer valid for Horizon Europe. So for all disciplines, scientific disciplines, you need to make the article accessible from the first day of acceptance. Now another tricky point, you need to be very careful with that, is that an article needs to be submitted open, but if you want to claim costs for this publication, because in general open access fees are reimbursable, in Horizon Europe though you have to take care that the journal that you have published, if you want to claim the cost, has to be full open access, which means not only your article needs to be open, but you need to check if all the articles in this journal are open, so if it is full open access. What we say here is that if you use a hybrid journal, but you still make the article open, of course you are compatible, but you cannot claim the costs. Now, also the obligation to make the data or other, for example, if you create software, needs to be, again, open access, and unless if there are valid exceptions. For example, if you were using very sensitive medical data or something, of course, in that case, you do not have to make it the data set compatible. I will just stay here. In general, this is the publication table. It looks a little big, but as we will explain, we try to facilitate a lot. It contains metadata, general metadata. I have marked here with red, with a red rectangle, 2 elements that are important in order to help you. So if you deposit in a repository, as we explained, then usually you have what we call the digital identifier, the DOI or PID of the publication. So you need to know from the repository the ID, this identifier, the hyperlink, so you can enter it where it says the PID of deposited publication. And the other, the PID of publisher version of record, is the standard of the journal. So you have a version in the journal, but as we said, you need also to submit to a repository. And once you have this, our system will facilitate you. In most of the cases, we connect to these external data sources or to the publisher websites, and we retrieve all the other metadata like the issue of the journal, the date, the pages of the article. You still have though to answer two manual questions, manually answered questions, in order to confirm that you have complied. So you need to say if you made the repository, if you submitted to the repository at the date of the publication, and if you have charged publishing fees to the project, in which case you will just be prompted again with a reminder that you need to be aware that the article that you use is full open access and not hybrid. So here it's how it looks, the publications table. As you will see, well, we have hidden some of the data because they are from real project publications. So the bottom, let's say, part of the table is the one that you report, and the first one is what we have already identified as relevant, possibly relevant for your project. So we have a system, you see below, there is an online system that we connect to, this OpenAir, and what it does is that it tries to identify if you have used correctly the metadata when you submit it to the publisher. So usually you have either the funder ID as metadata, or if you already have put the acknowledgement that acknowledges the EU funding, and there you refer also to the project ID. So we try to automatically identify the publications relevant to your project, and we propose them to you. So if you select immediately without typing anything else, it will be inserted in the publications table. In case you don't see it automatically, you can still, as we said, you can put the identifier. So if you already have from the repository the identifier digital, you can put it there, and then we will try to extract the metadata. In limited cases where this also doesn't work, you will have to enter, you can still enter the data manually. So you can select add publications, and then you add the rest of the data. Now, another table that is new for Horizon Europe, it's the results table. So results, as we will explain, there are different things that we can name as results, but what you need to have here, here you need to put the generic description of your results. So, for example, you have a scientific discovery, you have or a product that you developed, a process, a method. In principle, you need to give the description of major, let's say, outputs of your project. If for specific, types of results, you need to flag if they are exploitable, key exploitable results, in which also, as you understand and it will imply some other extra obligations later. So you need to take all the measures to properly disseminate and exploit the results. And a new element also is that we have in Horizon Europe. You need, at least until the end of the project, you need to define from the beneficiaries, or in general it could be also shared, who is the owner of these results. Now, as we will say, we will explain, results are also publications, but for the publications we have a separate table. Also the IPR patents datasets, for these cases we have a separate, so you don't put their publications, you just put the generic, the few key elements that are the output of your project, the scientific elements. Some examples. For example, you have developed a medical device. You can apply for a patent for it, you can exploit it later, you can describe also elements of this in publication. So if you have this kind, you will describe the device in the results table, and then if you have a patent, you encode it in the relevant table. If you also produce some publications related to it, or describing it, or whatever related to the research that you do, or other research in your project, not related exactly to the device, you can always encode the publications in the publications tab. Now, in case you just you have publications, but you also have a theory. So the project is around, let's say, a new theory that you produced, maybe a discovery in some area. So you put the name of the theory in the results table, and then all the publications, again, you don't put it, you don't encode it there, but you go in the publications table. Now, if you have, again, an industrial process, you describe the process, and if it is already under prototype, you have a specific, let's say, option to select that it is a key result and it's under prototyping. And then if you have a prototype, we have another tab that is called Other Results, where you can describe specifically the prototype that you created. Or again, for example, you can still describe, if you have software, you will just describe the process, but then you submit the elements concerning the software or the DOI, the link that you have put your code in another table. If you just have stuff exchanges, you just describe there in the results, and probably you don't need to add additional information. So here is the results table. So the first part you see, you can start encoding a result. We can put the name of the result. For example, you have a theory, scientific, then you type in the next column that it is a theory. If it is a key exploitable result, which means, for example, this usually applies for products or something similar. So you can describe that it is a key result. And in that case, maybe you will need to answer one or two questions more concerning the potential audience or how it can be exploited further. Now, the also additional element, which is a new obligation also from the grant agreement, at some point, especially when you have a specific types of results, for example, a product that should be later exploited, you need to define who is the owner of it. So it could be one beneficiary, it could be more, so you can have a joint relationship. So as you know from the relevant articles in the grant agreement and the Horizon Europe regulation, you need to own the results that you generate, and later you have specific obligations concerning the exploitation. For example, to use the Horizon Results platform to further try to exploit them if you already haven't taken measures by yourself. Another tab that we explained, we have already foreseen now for specific types of results. For example, if you have developed a software, so if you have produced some code and you put it in a repository, in general, it should be open, unless if there are specific conditions that prevent you from making it open, or even if it could be also that you develop a prototype or workflow, you need to report it here and to provide some information. So you need also to give information about the license, and also to give a link to the repository so that it could be accessible. In this table, we consider most of them, that they are open science. So again, you have to make, as a general rule, open, unless if other conditions prevent you from doing so. And we also rely on a specific reference, the digital identifier, to identify them where you have submitted them. Concerning IPR, here not a lot have changed. If you already are familiar with the Horizon 2020 approach, we have here you can enter if it is, for example, a trademark or a patent that you have put. We are again facilitating in case you have in a national EU system or in the European Patent Office, if you already have applied and you have a reference and you encode it here, we can retrieve it easily for you, the rest of the metadata. If not, if it is still, for example, in the submission phase, you can define that it is confidential, but still you can already warn us, you can inform us that you already have applied for patenting, and until it is, let's say, approved, the information will just be kept confidential also in our database. We don't publish anything. Now, this is an element that is, well, the elements behind it are not new, but as we will show, we have a new functionality. So concerning the IPR transfer request, in case you want to transfer exclusive licenses to entities in third countries, not associated to Horizon 2020 or Horizon Europe, you can always consult the Article 44.3 of the H2020 rules or 30.3 of the grant agreement. And concerning Horizon Europe, we have the Horizon Europe legislation. So it's Article 40. And also in the Annex 5, we have specific conditions for in the MGA. So in practice, you need to notify the granting authority because before you intend to transfer an exclusive license, and in that, let's say, what you need to do is to identify the specific results that concern the transfer that you intend to do, and to describe in detail the new owner or potential exploitation of the results, and also to put a reasoned assessment why this transfer of the exclusive license, it is on the EU interest in order, of course, if you want to approve this transfer. This is an obligation. So before you transfer exclusive license to third countries, you always need to notify us. The granting authority will, once we receive this formal notification, we will need to assess the request, and in 60 days we need to give you a reply in case it could be rejected. For example, if it violates the competitiveness interests of the European Union, if there are ethical principles behind, security consideration, or for any reason it's not in line with the Union interest. So this functionality is new. Although we said the obligation before existed, so we have given you a new way to inform us about your intention to transfer exclusive licenses to third countries. So this can be done by launching a formal notification that you will send to the EU. So from the portal, you select new interaction with the EU. You select that you send us formal notification, and there you will see the new thing is that you have a notification of exclusive transfer of IPR. You can select which organization concerns from the ones that you participate, and then you need also to add an attachment, and there we have developed for you a template which is available in the portal, so you will find it under the reporting template section, or I have put here in the presentation a direct link that you can use to answer all the questions that we said before, we described in the previous slide. So after that, we have similar data sets, similar tab for the data sets to report. Again, they are based on the principle of the DOI. So if you have a digital identifier, you can put it there, and then most of the metadata will be filled to inform us about data sets you have produced. Here, the standards existed already again in Horizon 2020, but the additional information that we have is that we not only ask about standards that were developed as an outcome of your project, but participation also. For example, you maybe have participated in meetings or other preparation, let's say, phases before creating a standard. Then also we have some new information, policy related, concerns the impact questionnaire. So there are questions that you need to fill in order to help us assess the impact on several aspects, for example, concerning societal or financial impact of your project. So you need to answer a few questions. What is the technology readiness of your project, for example, before and after the project? The contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals. So there are a number of UN defined from the United Nations. It's a typology. For example, if you contribute to environment or other specific areas in clean air or the seas. Then we have a specific two questions that concern the citizen engagement. Maybe you have considered engaging citizens in your project and the results, for example, defining requirements or results. We have some questions concerning the overall impact of the project in the three, let's say, directions that we said before, the society or the economic and scientific impact. And then there are some questions concerning the exploitation. For example, if you plan to continue, let's say, employing people from the project, if you plan to set up a new company for the exploitation of results, if you have attracted other sources of funding like private or public funds to continue your research. And then there are some optional questions concerning what is your feedback, factors that helped or made you, that you find difficulties during the development of your project. This is more or less the continuous reporting, and I have some few slides. So the periodic reporting module, this is activated, as we said, when specific the time frame for the periodic reports elapses. It concerns more or less the tables that we have seen in the continuous reporting, but then you have also to contribute to the technical part and the financial statements for each beneficiary. The coordinator will submit and the EU services will assess it. So once the time comes, you receive a notification, and then you have an extra process in the portal, you see, so you have to fill the periodic reporting. The data that you have put already in the continuous reporting will be there, so there is synchronization. Some tabs are common, but the periodic reporting has some extra information. So one is the periodic, the technical report. So it is a document that all the beneficiaries have to contribute and explain how they have advanced in the project. And you will be able to download it from a new tab that will be available only during the periodic reporting. And then for the technical part, as you see, each beneficiary has to make their contribution. And then when the coordinator knows that everybody is ready, they can log and submit for review. And they can also approve the contributions of the other part. So the primary coordinator contact, so the part of the person who is responsible on behalf of the beneficiary, as you see, they can accept and include the contribution or unlock to draft, for example, if you want something for a beneficiary specific to change. Otherwise, you accept and include, and then you will have also the possibility to submit the report. Another part also of the periodic reporting is the financial. So here you will see every beneficiary has to fill in their financial part, and also if they have an affiliated entity, a third party, you will have to fill for them. So what you have to do here, it's quite simple. So you have the budget table, so you need to report in specific categories the amounts that are to be claimed for this period. So some they have just an empty, let's say, field that you need to fill, but for some others there is a link next to them and you have to add some additional information. So you can find always on the portal we have specific detailed instructions how to fill the specific button. Here for the personnel, for example, we have an example what you have to do. Just by clicking the link, then there is an extra, let's say, pop-up that you need to define. You claim costs, but then you need also to make an analysis. For example, if this amount that you entered consists in a number of person months, you need to show how these person months were distributed among the different work packages. It's quite straightforward. You need to fill all the categories for which you claim costs, and the beneficiary, for each beneficiary, then the project financial signatory of each beneficiary will submit, and the coordinator, of course, will consolidate all the data and will be the one who submits to the EU. So the EU officer will approve the data, and then you will go on with the payments. And that concludes my presentation, so thank you. And maybe we can go on to the questions.
Thank you very much, Petros. We have plenty of questions and we have about half an hour now for answering them. If I can see in my screen the questions. Yeah, the first question, I think it's a legal question. What happens if the number of person months is higher in the reporting compared to the planning? Do you want to give it a try, or we go to Ioannis? Are you there?
Yes, I can take the floor.
Okay.
So it depends on the difference. If there is a slight change, you have to just simply justify the change during the reporting. But if the change is significant, I would suggest to amend the project before the reporting. And if it's too late, and the change is significant, then it may be treated as improper implementation of the action, and then later on it may lead to reduction of the grant. So it's important to be in touch with your project officer and as soon as possible to find the best solution.
Thank you, Ioannis. We have another question for you from Kate, this one. DESCA consortium agreement template has an option of distribution of pre-financing installments. Is this in line with the grant agreement rule of no delay of money redistribution?
Maybe I can answer to that. The coordinator, as you know, the coordinator should send the payments without unjustified delay. But it's up to the beneficiaries to distribute the money, to find a way how to distribute the money. And to keep it short, if the coordinator have a justification not to distribute the full amount to the beneficiaries at the beginning, and it's in line with the consortium agreement, then it is okay. As I understand, the justification would be that it's keeping part of the money to properly control the progress of action, and then we can consider that it is not unjustified delay, so it's possible.
Thank you. Next question. Are all cost documents only to be kept in case of audit, or they should also be delivered with the interim and final reports?
So there is no need to send the cost documents to us. You need to keep the documents at your place in case of an audit. If you want to, the documents should be kept for the time set out in the data sheet after the project ends. And for the details, you can check the annotated model grant agreement, Article 20.
Thank you. Next question. Do days spent on the projects have to be reported per work package or in general with the list of work packages per month? For instance, 10 days for work package 5, 12 for work package 6, or altogether 22 days for both work packages?
Bartosz, would you like? I can take it.
Yeah.
They spent in the project have to be reported in general as person months in work packages in line with your usual accounting practices for technical reporting. For the financial reporting, you have to declare the personal costs as day equivalents. In financial reporting, we don't concentrate on work packages, but on the costs.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question, can costs be declared in the following reporting period if by mistake they were not reported in the respective reporting period?
Principle, yes.
So it is.
Can, yeah.
It's okay.
Petros.
You can.
Yeah.
In principle, yes, you can always claim the costs in the next period, but of course the payment will have to delay. I don't know.
Okay, next question. In the timesheets, do we need to report on a task basis or is enough to report time per work package? Petros also?
Yeah. So for the timesheets, I'm not sure. I think maybe it's for the legals maybe to define.
Yeah. Ioannis, you want to give it a try?
Bartosz, would you like to take the floor? Or?
Yes, you don't have to report the timesheets on a task basis. It's enough to report per work package for the technical reporting. So there is no need to report on the task basis, but only at the level of work package.
Perfect, thank you. Reporting period ceiling. What if in the country there are more than 215 working days? Reported days can be only until reaching 215 in this year, for instance, of 15th of December?
The limit,
Yeah.
I can take it. Yeah.
Okay.
The limit is the same for all countries. it's because the way how we calculate the personal cost. Otherwise, if you could report more days, then you would make a profit. So it's impossible. That's why we have set up the limit, and the limit is the same for all the countries.
Thank you. The next question, is there an example for part B of the periodic report, just to get a better idea?
Yes, there is. As we explained, there is a link in the portal, so all the templates are there. I don't know if you, for filled in, no, we don't supply, it depends on the project. So there are specific questions if you take the template. Be aware also that in there, in principle, you find the generic template. It could be that for your specific action, you will have, I mean, it contains more questions than the ones applicable for you, because it is for more actions. In the case when you come to report, you will find always the template that is applicable exactly for the type of action for your project. But in principle, the template is quite descriptive, and if you download it, you will see the questions that you will have to be asked during the submission of the periodic report.
How to calculate person month based on days fractions of days reported? Is it total days reported in a month, 1792, 215 days, etc.? Or shall we do otherwise?
Maybe I can take it. As Ioannis previously explained, you have to calculate the person months according to your usual practice. We don't use person months for the financial reporting. We use it only for the technical reporting. And the way how you proposed it in the question, it's very reasonable, and it would be acceptable for us.
Thank you. We have now a question from Catherine. Is it correct that the EC monitors more closely deviation in average personnel costs of beneficiaries, and that explanations will be asked most of the time? Do the lawyers want to give it a try? Maybe we should ask for an auditor. We don't have any now available, sorry.
In principle,
I'm afraid.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
No, please, Petros.
In principle, you need to always explain. You will see there is also a link in the report that you always, if you have well, mostly we ask about deviations in the description containing the implementation of the action. Concerning the personnel costs, indeed, I don't know exactly to what you are referring, because we explained already that if it refers to having spent a little more than what was foreseen already, or if you have some other deviations, if you change for example, the category of costs, that is something different that maybe you need to warn and to ask for an amendment. So it's a little not clear also what is the question here. Is it concerning the monitoring? Does it concern a change that you have to apply in your project, or something else?
The next question is, are project members allowed to book train tickets due to climate protection reasons instead of flying tickets, even though they are sometimes slightly more expensive?
In principle, as long as there is, let's say, the only risk is that you might not have sufficient budget, or if you can do even in the, you could also in the concerning the rules of flexibility do it, but it is not, of course, it is not forbidden. You can still do it as long as you have budget, because if all the other categories, let's say, are already consumed and then you don't have extra, we will not be able to reimburse you more money if you have exceeded what was foreseen in the project.
And to complement what Petros said, all the costs have to be in line with your usual practice. So if you travel by trains only in Horizon Europe projects, and otherwise you take the cheapest ways of transport, I don't think that we could accept that. So you have to follow your own rules. If in other projects you also traveling by trains, then it would be acceptable for us also.
Thank you. The next question is for reporting the cost of project meetings. For instance, splitting invoices in hotels is a challenge. How can the coordinator cover the cost while sharing it among the beneficiaries?
I can. Bartosz, do you? Oh. No, you don't have to split the bills. It is possible that one of the beneficiaries or the coordinator would pay the invoice and report it as its own cost.
Thank you. Next question. Are travel costs eligible if, for example, for the partner travels not from their legal place of work but from another country?
Yes, it is, Bartosz, you and me, or me.
It's up to you if you want to take it.
Yes, traveling outside the EU is an eligible cost if it fulfills all the general and specific conditions to be eligible. And notably, the costs must be incurred in connection with the action and must be described in Annex 1 of the grant agreement, and it is necessary for the implementation of the action.
Thank you. We have now a question from Elias Friedrich. What happens when one beneficiary doesn't submit the financial statement?
They cannot claim costs for this specific reporting period, unless
He
if you mean doesn't submit at all. I don't know. Sorry.
Yes, but he could submit the financial statement so he would need to wait for the next reporting period, and then he can submit the financial statement after the end of the next reporting period.
Thank you. Next question is from Damir. The amount of interim payments depends on reported cost, or is a fixed amount and then on the last payment a final calculation based on reported costs is made?
Ioannis, do you want, or okay, I can take this one. So the amount of interim payments depends on the reported costs, but there is a limit which is 19% that can be reimbursed by the Commission. Like the last 10% have to be paid at the end of the action as a final payment, or even 15 because we have MIM. This is why, like,
we have already mentioned it in the presentation, I think.
Yes, it was also already covered by the presentation.
Thank you. Next question about daily rate. Reporting period or year? Both options are in either grant agreement or in annotated grant agreement. Financial officers are also not consistent. A clear position is expected. The lawyers want to give a try?
Please start and I will complement.
Okay, so the way how you should calculate the personal cost is explained in annotated model grant agreement, and you have to calculate the costs per reporting period. There is a second option that is also possible, that you could calculate it by on the yearly basis, but what we mean by a year are the years within the reporting period. So actually in both cases the time that can be taken into account for calculation of personal cost is always the reporting period. You can divide the calculation into the years, but only within the reporting period. What I would like to advise you is to go to annotated model grant agreement article 6, and there you can find a clear explanation how to calculate the personal cost. Otherwise we would spend a lot of time on that.
And if I may add something, is that The calculation may be done separately for each calendar year within the reporting period. Of course, there is also this option, as you said, but this has to be consistently applied. Okay.
Thank you. Next question. Can we report time outside the duration of a work package?
To be honest, I do not understand the question.
Yes.
But
maybe if they could send it through the research inquiry service with more details.
Okay, thank you. Next question then. In a lump sum grant, can we use external consultants to do part of the task or to do all the tasks needed to be done within the partner organizations?
I'm afraid our presentation mainly covered the actual cost Horizon Europe MGA, so I think I'm not in the position to reply to this. Bartos, do you have any? Or Petros?
In principle, the rules are more or less the same. So I don't know, here from what you describe, it looks like you want to use subcontracting. So if this is not described in the action, then you will have to seek for approval. So you cannot delegate tasks to other entities that are not described in the action. So you will need to consult with the project office. It's always like if you want to engage into subcontracting that was not described prior to the action.
Yes, and to complement, only limited part of the action may be subcontracted in all the projects, not only lump sums but also in the real cost projects.
And also to add something, we had plenty of webinars on lump sum. They are all reported in the events page of the Funding and Tenders portal with presentations, questions, and the recording of the video. So maybe you can get additional information there too. Next question, is there a deadline for completing the project summary?
No, in principle, no. The only thing is that as you so you can do it as soon as possible or later if you want, but during the periodic report, this is a tab that you will have to fill. So you will have an error that shows like if you have not filled some important information. So when you are ready to submit the periodic report, you need at least to have something there. Now, if you want to do it later or earlier, it would be suggested to do it as early as possible so that you can update Cordis with the correct data. Otherwise, it will just take something that was already available during the proposal.
Thank you. Is traveling outside the European Union an eligible cost in Horizon Europe?
I think we have replied it already to this. No?
Next question then. Is there a deadline for compiling the publication or does it have to be done at the latest at the time of the periodic report?
No, there is no deadline, but I mean, because you can already report it, let's say, in the next report. The issue is that in many cases, there are projects which define a lot of publications. So you will have to do a lot of work if you go towards the end of the project. It is suggested that as soon as you have a publication, also to assist us also easier in, let's say, making the reports that we need to do and to see how the progress of the framework program in general. So we also monitor the progress of the projects in general. So it would also help us if you do it. But otherwise, there is no deadline, except, of course, if you have to do it at the end of the project with the counter side that you will have to do a lot of information to enter at once.
Thank you, Petros. Is the section researchers involved in the project mandatory? Is there a deadline for compiling it?
In principle, the obligation to inform us about the researchers, yes, it is mandatory. As we said again, if there are specific types of actions, if for sometimes coordinating actions or other that do not engage in as prime, let's say, thing research, so in that case, you cannot let's say, it's not necessary to do it. If though you have described in the proposal that you had researchers that were evaluated, if you still engage in making researchers work in the project, then yes, you have the obligation to do it. Deadline for compiling it, I think it would not be strict. You need to report them as soon as they are engaged in the project. At the very end, at least you need to have reported all of the persons. What maybe I didn't, let's say, emphasize a lot is that the persons that were in the proposal declared as taking part in the project, they should be always there. You cannot delete, because that implies that maybe some of them, they also contributed in evaluating your project positively. So if somebody that you declared is not there, then maybe you need to contact the project officer to assess if there is a significant change. So you should not remove researchers, and you should add them as they come. If you have researchers, yes, you are obliged to put them. If you think that somebody is on the borderline between administrative personnel and the researcher, it's up to you to define according to the definition also that we gave in the Frascati manual.
Next question, does a person who's working full-time only for one project need to report his or her working time?
I suppose they ask for timesheets, right? Because then you need, yes, to have timesheets. So if you work only for one project, yes, of course, you need to report them, but it's easier for you.
What amount of detailed information do we need for dissemination? For instance, conference participation. Title of presentation is enough? Please provide examples.
Well, if you have in principle, you know, if you have a presentation in a conference, so I don't know if it is linked to a publication, maybe you just declare the publication. In principle, that section refers to events that you organized as part of the project. So, for example, you create a campaign, a media campaign, or you create a session for presenting the results of your project. So you would just put the title. And then the other data that you need to enter are related to that. So, for example, you create a session presenting as part of an event for your project. Then you put the title, the title of the session, for example, and then what was the audience? For example, it was addressed to people who were academics. It was addressed for people who are in applied science. It was the general public that was informed about it. And why, for example? Because you wanted to promote, I don't know, the results only, or in general your project. You can write two things. It's not complicated.
Thank you. Is there any option to charge obligatory costs for a long-term illness once the person does not create productive hours anymore? Maybe the lawyers?
Yes, I can take this one. We have the only exception that we use in model grant agreement is for is for parental leave. So if it's parental leave, you can deduct the time spent on parental leave in the calculation of personal costs. For the other, like long-term illnesses, you cannot deduct any time.
Next one, personnel costs when they have changed. Okay, in Maria Slodowska-Curie EF grant will move to a new beneficiary. What happens with unused budget in research and training category for reported person months at original beneficiary? Any idea from the lawyer's part?
MSCI is a very particular part of Horizon Europe, so I would direct them again to Research Inquiry Service. Bartosz, do you have anything to add? Or
I can add that the former beneficiary would have to submit the termination report, and the costs that have been that are in the accounts at the time of termination would be reimbursed by us, and the rest could be moved to so the unused amounts could be used for the new beneficiary.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. With the 215 days ceiling, we have answered something similar before. Some days in late December are not allowed to be reported if it's already more than 215 days. Is that correct? And I think you said that no, they cannot report more than 215 because it will be overpayment. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So let's go to the next one. Personnel costs when extra payments are paid end of each quarter. Period end is middle of the month. Problem with double cap. Any comment there? And that will be the last question.
Bartosz?
Yes, so for the personal costs and the extra payments, it depends on the way how you do your books. You can do the accrual accounting and actual, like cash-based accounting. And what is important is whether you can or cannot calculate it in the reporting period is the time when you have paid. So it is important for the cash-based method, or if you use the accrual reporting, then if you have these amounts in your accounts accrued. So this is the answer.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Actually, we should finish here because we still have one more presentation. Thanks, Petros. Thank you, Ioannis. And there is somebody else with you. Who is him for the record?
Yes, I'm here. My name is Bartosz.
Okay, thank you very much for coming here. So the next presentation we have will be the last presentation of today. It's a very short presentation, I've been told. It's about 15 minutes and we have time for questions afterwards. The presentation is from Manuela SERRANO. She's an auditor in the Common Implementation Center, and the presentation is about fraud prevention, detection and correction. Manuela is here in the studio with us. So Manuela.
Good afternoon. Yes, I would like to say that I work in the Common Implementation Center in Common Audit Service, but as anti-fraud policy officer. Particularly, I work in fraud in prevention and detection fraud in research and innovation programs. I can use this, no?
Yeah.
Okay, like this, maybe. Next one. Oh, yes. Yes, perfect. Here is the table of contents. In the presentation, I would like to focus on what I consider is really most important, which is your role, the special role of the consortia in fraud prevention and detection, red flags and controls. But also I will give a short explanation about fraud, what and why, most common type of fraud in research and innovation programs, why fight against fraud, the Commission anti-fraud strategy, and also particular attention to newer types of attempted fraud. So here, your role in fraud prevention and detection is really key. You, beneficiaries and coordinator, are in the best place to detect any suspicion of fraud. And how you can detect a fraud? First, pay attention to red flags. Red flags or suspicion indicators of fraud, and cross-check in that situations, only in case that there are red flags. Keep all evidence and quickly report to your project officer, OLAF, or EPPO. Why? Why? Because along with the Commission, you will benefit for the proper and lawful implementation of the project. You know that in case of fraud, fraud prevents the proper implementation of the project, and also involves that can lead also to corrective measures, contractual and administrative sanctions. So please maintain good communication with your project officer and report to OLAF and EPPO. Here is a definition of fraud in general, but we will focus on fraud affecting the union's financial interests. Why? Because this is a criminal offense, is defined in Article 3 of this directive, and irregularity in Article 1.2 of this Council regulation. But I will explain. The difference between fraud and irregularities is essentially the intentionality. Fraud is any intentional breach of the union law by action of omission that damages the union's financial interests. I mention action, for example, misrepresentation, falsification of documents, but also omission is because fraud is committed in case that you don't provide information in violation of an obligation. On the contrary, irregularity doesn't involve intentionality. In case of irregularities, it's a breach of the union law that damages the union's financial interests. Understanding the reasons behind fraud is important to prevent fraud. Here in this, you can see in this slide the theory that explains the reasons behind fraud. Opportunity, incentives first, is the motivation. Opportunity is the real or perceived intentionality to commit fraud. For example, is possible in case of opportunity or weak internal control system. Rationalization is the personal justification, and capability is the skills, the abilities to commit fraud. In this slide, you can see the most common types of fraud and serious irregularities in research and innovation grants. Intentionally inflated costs and fictitious costs, mainly personnel and subcontracted costs, jointly with misrepresentation of false declaration and falsification of invoices, supporting documents, report, deliverables, contracts, subcontracts, etc., are the most common type of fraud in R&I grants. But also, in case of fraudulent bankruptcy, intentional irregular subcontracting, undisclosed conflict of interest, for example, between a subcontractor and a beneficiary, or a beneficiary with the staff, cases of double funding, plagiarism, and also fictitious beneficiaries or shell entities. Why fight against fraud? Fraud is a risk with a low occurrence rate in research and innovation program. At the end of the slides, I can show you some statistics. But fraud has a high reputational impact. You know that EU citizens deserve the budget to be spent for the intended purposes, but also you, as I mentioned, along with the Commission, will benefit for the prevention and detection of fraud. Here you can see the Commission anti-fraud strategy that was adopted in 2019 with two priority objectives, which is data collection and analysis of fraud patterns, coordination and cooperation, and also important guiding principles are ethics, enhanced transparency in the way that the Commission spends money, and fraud prevention. And this year, in July, in 2023, this year was adopted an updated action plan, anti-fraud action plan of the Commission. Here in the action plan, there is a foster digitalization, enforced digitalization, and the use of corporate IT tools to fight fraud. But we, the R&I family, has a common anti-fraud strategy, which is based on the principle of better control rather than more control, a risk-based approach and trust approach. This strategy is currently being updated. This strategy deals with the fraud committed by beneficiaries related to the implementation of these R&I programs concerning only grant expenditure. Also, all the implementing bodies in research and innovation have a particular sectorial anti-fraud strategies that cover, for example, procurement and financial management. Who is responsible for prevention and detection? Every staff member all the implementing bodies, DGs, research and innovation DGs, executive agencies and joint undertakings. They are supported by anti-fraud experts in every services who works closely with OLAF. OLAF plays an important role in prevention and detection, drafting the strategy that I mentioned before, supporting all the implementing bodies and even member state in shared management. But also applicants and beneficiaries, as I mentioned, you also are responsible in prevention and detection. Investigation. Investigation can be performed only for two bodies. OLAF, the European Anti-Fraud Office, which perform independent internal and external administrative investigations, and also the European Public Prosecutor's Office. This body performed criminal investigation, conduct criminal investigation, prosecution, and also bringing to judgment prosecutors and accomplices. And the correction is made by each granting authority. In my opinion, this is the slide most important, because here you can see what you can do for fraud prevention and detection. As I mentioned at the beginning, pay attention to red flags. Red flags are risk indicators of suspicion of fraud, not necessarily fraud, but trigger your attention. This indicator triggers your attention and alert you that something can be checked or should be checked. For example, in that case, you can check by using in the internet, open sources databases, public registers, science journals, publication, platforms, websites. I give you an example. For example, bank account. To check bank account is really important to prevent hacking and all the phishing emails that I will refer at the end of this presentation. Contact details. Checking contact details in the internet is also very useful. For example, the address. You can detect, for example, private addresses, premises, or that, for example, non-existent websites, or websites with insufficient or inconsistencies in the structure, in the managers or business scope of the beneficiary. If you have concern about, for example, you detected fabricated CVs, or you have concern, in consequence, about fake researchers and their capacity, you can go to profession-based platforms, LinkedIn and many others, and cross-check and confirm your suspicion. Another example, imagine that you have concern about the financial capacity of a beneficiary, financial difficulties, possible bankruptcy. You can go to the public registers. There are many, but here is mentioned one of them, is the business and bankruptcy registers in the European e-justice portal. With all, when you have cross-checked your suspicion, keep all evidence and report early your suspicion and observation to your project officer and OLAF and or EPPO. And here you have the fraud notification system. Where you can immediately report and you can find information how to do this, and also the report crime web form for the EPPO. As a consequence, in case of fraud, you know that there are corrective measures, contractual measures that are well explained in the grant agreement, suspension of payments, rejection of costs, reduction of the grants, termination of the beneficiary concern. But also in the financial regulation, there are, as you know, administrative sanctions that can be imposed by the granting authority using the very important tool, which is the early detection and exclusion system. In case of fraud, corruption or other illegal activities is possible even with or without a final judgment. And these administrative sanctions are the exclusion for participation in an award procedure for maximum 5 years or the duration of the final judgments, but also financial penalties in case of systemic and recurrent conduct. Also, is possible the publication publication of the findings in the European Commission's website. And here you have the hyperlink to see the EDES databases. You can see all the entities have been excluded from participating in our procedure. It's possible also the rejection in case of ongoing procedures. The EDES that plays also an important role for fraud prevention and detection. Is the component of the early detection of persons or entities that who is posing a risk to the union's financial interests. And this is made with monitoring purposes. At the end of the slide, you can see the hyperlink to the EDES activity in the last year, and you see how this system functions, and also you can see all the entities and publication or cases that trigger the exclusion for participation in our procedures. This is the last part of the presentation. You know that is very common, not only research and innovation programs, but in general in the Commission was detected by the Commission in the fraud risk assessment that performed this year, a new form of patterns, which is hacking, improper access to bank accounts, to devices, etc. And here there are four patterns that were detected in research and innovation programs, which is the first one is the most important because these cases affect the union's financial interest. This involves that is a criminal offense, and also is important because this involves identity theft. In these cases, fraudsters impersonate legitimate beneficiaries and send emails to coordinators requesting payments, pre-financing and interim payments to be transferred to the bank account. So in these cases, please verify the bank account via the trusted channel, and in any case of phishing emails, don't reply, don't provide any personal information, and inform your granting authority immediately. Here there are two more patterns. The first one is unsolicited emails or phone calls by individuals falsely offering consultancy services, for example, to submit a well-written proposals. In these cases, also EU documents are falsified. And the third one is phishing emails or fake letters offering the award of EU grants. These are not very sophisticated, but as you know, all the award procedure in the European Commission follow a competitive and open competition. So in this case, but however this situation can happen, so in these cases they request personal information or paying certain amounts. And the last one is phishing messages to many users which look identical to the portal notifications, requesting again personal information. For that reason, please secure your portal account with two-factor authentications. In any case, ignore them, exercise caution when opening attachment or downloading files. In conclusion, be aware that zero tolerance to fraud to protect the union budget is essential. Pay attention to red flags. Quickly report any suspicion to the granting authority and OLAF and EPPO. And at the end, here, you have a slide with more information in case you want to know about fighting against fraud to protect the EU budget. The annual report, the PIF report or annual reports on the protection of the union financial interests are drafted any year by the Commission and Member State, and they report to the European Parliament with all the measures that they have taken to prevent and detect fraud. Later you have the annual OLAF reports and also the EPPO annual reports. At the end, the very end, you have statisticals in case you are interested. In the PIF report, in the section 6, you have, for example, concerning direct management in general. The information concerning direct management is provided in the PIF report are extracted from the internal accounting system of the Commission on Recovery Orders. For example, in the 5 last year, you have the ratio between the financial amounts related to regularities reported as fraudulent and expenditure is close to 0.03%. In case of not reporting as fraudulent, irregularities not reporting as fraudulent is 0.22%. And in the last is concerning the method of detection, in case of not fraudulent activities, the Commission controls are key through ex ante and ex post controls, and in case of fraudulent activities or fraud, OLAF is the main source of detection, but I clarify that many of the OLAF findings come from allegations made by informant, you, for example, coordinators or beneficiaries. Regarding or concerning types, the most common types of irregularities in general in the Commission, this is a general, in particular in direct management, the most common are amount ineligible and followed by document missing. And this is the final of the presentation. I don't know if you have many questions. This is important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manuela. Actually, we have a few questions for you. Yes, I think there are 4 questions in total. So if we can see them on screen, otherwise I can read them directly from my phone. The first question, actually, I'm not sure it's 100% related with fraud. It's about artificial intelligence, actually. What is the position of the Commission on using artificial intelligence as, for instance, ChatGPT in writing reports with the purpose of improving language or other purposes?
Yeah, exactly. This is a common possible fraud, not only affecting the Commission. I know that more and more the Commission, in particular the action plan, as I mentioned before, are using focusing on digitalization in using corporate IT tools to detect any possible fraud. And in case of artificial intelligence, I think that also there is, the Commission is paying a lot of attention to this kind of situation. I'm not aware exactly of which kind of action, but I know that they are addressing this kind of situations. Yes.
Thank you. How fraud is detected in a lump sum grant?
Oh, yeah. Well, first I would say that we have performed a fraud risk assessment to draft our common anti-fraud strategy, and for the moment, we cannot say that nothing is different from actual costs in lump sums. I think that in case there's a case of fraud, maybe the technical evaluation is by experts is really important to prevent if, for example, is the costs are reasonable or not. So the evaluators are key to detect. Also, the technical reviews are essential also to detect possible fraud. But for the moment, I think in the fraud risk assessment we have performed, nothing is different for actual costs.
Thank you. Next question is from Anna Karenina Deininger. As coordinator, is it a best practice to oblige the beneficiaries to use the EU template financial information form when communicating us the bank data?
Financial information from I'm not completely sure about this response, but I suppose that is good. You have a template, particularly for this communicating bank accounts, is really very useful. But in any case, as I mentioned before, check with other sources the bank accounts, because to avoid the situation that I mentioned before in possible hacking or fraudster that impersonate coordinators to obtain findings or payments. But I think that is a good idea also.
Thank you. And the last question we have is, how do we check bank accounts belonging to some African countries like Angola, for instance? We are told by our bank here that there is no possibility to verify those accounts.
I didn't don't know exactly if the bank say that is not possible, but in any case, I don't know really if there are a possibility in this situation to perform particular checks, but in any case, I recommend also to look, as I mentioned before, in the internet and try to know about this particular entity, because they can give you information also, I think.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your answers. And with that, we finalize the third of the 3 Horizon implementation days that we had so far. We had one on search for call, submission and evaluation on the 5th of October. We had another one on the 17th of October on grant agreement preparation, and this one on grant management. All 3 of them are available, both presentations and recording, in the page of the Funding and Tenders portal under events, so you can check them all. With that, I just want to finalize giving my thanks actually to all the presenters here, to the people from the technical room, who are Kiko Vega and Gino Noui, who have been helping us here with the studio, and with Slido we had the help from Dominika Kotowicz, who is somewhere in Poland following us remotely. And finally, I want to thank you all actually for coming here, for staying here the full morning with us, and hope to see you next time. By the way, next time is already on the 14th of November. It's a training that is published already in the events page, and it's a training about Horizon Results Booster. 14th of November. Hope to see you there. Have a nice day.